The judge was smiling when he tried to bury me. Not a warm smile, just that tight little grin people get when they think the game is fixed and you are already finished. I was standing there in an orange jumpsuit, cuffs cutting into my wrists, sweat running down my back in that hot Briarwood County courtroom. And all I could think was, you really have no idea who you are talking to, do you? Judge Graham Winslow looked down at me like I was just another number on his docket, and he had no clue the man he was about to send to prison was the same man who had signed his federal arrest warrant 2 weeks earlier. Briarwood Courthouse is old wood, stale air, and polished benches, one of those places where the paint keeps getting refreshed but the mindset never really changes. And Winslow loved that the air conditioning had been broken for years, loved watching people in chains sweat under bad fluorescent lights, while he sat back in his robe like the heat did not apply to him. They called my case like it was just another Tuesday State of Westfield versus Darius Cole, and when the bailiff read off aggravated assault on a peace officer resisting arrest possession with intent to distribute, you could feel the gallery lean in a little the way people do when they think the next 30 minutes are going to confirm everything they already believe about guys who look like me. I walked to the defense table, slow chain dragging the tile, and I could feel Winslow measuring me, his eyes doing that lazy up and down before he filed me under thug outsider, nobody worth worrying about. My public defender, Ethan Lane, was waiting for me at the table, skinny kid suit, just a touch too big. Dark circles under his eyes like the job was eating him alive, but his jaw clenched every time the judge spoke, and that told me there was still some fight in him. Across from us, prosecutor Monica Hart had her files lined up in perfect stacks. Blazer, sharp voice, smooth as she stood and asked for $500,000 cash bail like she was ordering a sandwich. And if you did not know how the machine worked, you might have thought this was just the system doing its job. Ethan argued, said I had no record. Said the powder they claimed was cocaine had not even been tested yet. Said this whole thing started as a traffic stop and went sideways because of Riker, the arresting deputy. But Winslow shut him down with one crack of the gavel, eyes already back on his docket. Bail is set at $750,000 cash only, he said like he was calling out a parking fine. Trial is Thursday. And when Ethan reminded him Thursday was in 2 days and he did not even have discovery, Winslow just gave that tight little smile and told him he had better work late because he was not letting a man like me walk around his county. I glanced at the clock on the wall, then at my watch, partly playing board defendant, mostly checking the timing on our operation, and when I raised my head and said I was requesting a change of venue, you could feel the room stumble for a second. Defendants in that courtroom did not say change of venue, they said yes, sir, and no, sir. So Winslow pounced, told me in Briarwood County his word was the law, and I looked him right in the eye and said, your word is the law. For now. The bailiff. Carver squeezed my arm a little harder than necessary while he marched me toward the side door, and I let him. But as we passed the court reporter, I leaned just close enough to say, make sure you spell the judge's name right. This transcript is going to matter someday. And she shot me a quick, confused look, then kept typing like her life depended on it. A couple hours later, we were in the jail's little visitation room. Foggy glass metal table bolted to the floor stools that were all the wrong height, and Ethan dropped my file down like it weighed 50 pounds, rubbed his eyes and told me straight. I am going to be honest with you. This is bad. He laid it out. Winslow was running for re-election on a law and order platform and needed a scary conviction to put on his campaign mailers. Monica wanted to look tough on crime. Deputy Riker was a small-town hero in uniform whose word juries treated like gospel, and on paper, I was the perfect villain, an out-of-town black guy with a bag of cocaine in the trunk and a cop claiming I had attacked him. He said the body cam footage had somehow corrupted during upload. The dash cam turned to static right when anything useful should have been recorded, and if he lost, I was looking at 20 years minimum under the state's drug and assault laws. Then he told me he could not put me on the stand. That was Defense 101. The prosecutor would twist my words, push my buttons until I looked angry in front of the jury. And the minute that happened, all they would see was the story they already had in their heads. I let him talk because he was right about how things usually go in that room. Then I told him I needed him to break his rule, that I wanted him to put me on the stand and ask one question, just one. Where were you the night of the arrest? He stared at me like I had grown a second head and said, absolutely not. You do not understand how fast this can go wrong, and I had to laugh a little because I understood exactly how wrong it could go. I had built my whole career around watching it go wrong for people who did not have anybody in their corner. There is always this moment in undercover work where you decide whether to keep someone in the dark to protect them or bring them into the truth and hope they can handle it. And sitting there looking at this exhausted kid who was still angry enough to care, I chose to trust him. I leaned in and said, "You are not failing me." "Ethan, the only people failing here are wearing the robe and the badge. Just ask the question when I tell you to." And after a long, tired breath, he nodded and said, "All right, but you better know what you are doing." The next morning, the courthouse had that strange, quiet energy, the kind you feel before a storm. Retirees filling the gallery like they were there for a matinee, cops lined up in the back with their arms crossed, and Riker sitting ready in his pressed uniform, jaw set, looking every bit the brave officer attacked by a dangerous stranger. Monica put him on the stand, and he told his story, how he made a routine stop, how I lunged at him, how he feared for his life, how he heroically restrained me and discovered the drugs in my trunk. And every time Ethan tried to push back with hearsay or lack of foundation or the missing lab report, Winslow knocked him down with an "overruled" before he even finished the sentence. I sat there, hands folded, watching the jurors watch us, saw the story settle into their eyes, the dangerous outsider, the brave cop, the strong judge protecting his town. And yeah, a part of me wondered how many people had watched their life get rewritten in that same room with no way to stop it. When Monica finally said, "The state rests," Winslow checked his watch, sighed like we were wasting his time, and said, "Mr. Lane, call your witness and make it quick. I have a tea time," and Ethan shot me a look that said, "This is it." Then turned back and said, "The defense calls Darius Cole." You could feel the temperature change just a little, a murmur in the gallery, a small smile from Monica, like she had been handed a gift, and Carver unhooked my chain and walked me to the stand. I put my hand on the Bible, swore in, sat down, adjusted the mic, and for half a second I let myself feel how many people had sat in that same chair with no cards up their sleeve. Then I pushed that down and focused. Ethan came up, voice a little shaky but clear, and asked Mr. Cole, on the night of August 12th, the night of your arrest, "Where were you?" I looked at the jury, then at Monica, then at Winslow, and said I was at a gas station on Route 14, standing by my rental car on the phone, with the deputy director of the FBI authorizing a federal wiretap on Judge Winslow's private chambers line. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioner that did not work, and then everything tried to happen at once. Monica jumped to her feet, shouting about hearsay and disrespect. Winslow slammed the gavel, barking at Ethan to control his client and threatening me with contempt, and the jurors just stared at me like I had told them the sky was green. I did not raise my voice. I leaned in and said, "I am not a drug dealer, Your Honor. My name is Special Agent Darius Cole, United States Department of Justice, Public Integrity Division, and I have been undercover in your courtroom for 2 days under a federal warrant, listening to you help rig a case so you can send one more man to a private prison. You get kickbacks to keep full." I watched something crack in his expression, just a flicker, and behind me the sirens that had been background noise all morning suddenly got so loud they rattled the windows. Winslow barked at Carver to remove me and clear the courtroom. Carver's hand went toward his gun because habit is a powerful thing, and I said calm as I could, "If you draw that weapon, you are not going home tonight. There are federal agents on the roof of the library across the street who have had you in their sights since 8 a.m. You know what I mean." A heartbeat later, the courtroom doors blew inward, and the place filled with FBI jackets, rifles, shouted commands, people in the gallery hitting the floor, papers flying, that wild mix of chaos and control that says very clearly the power in the room just shifted. Special Agent in charge. Raymond Ortiz walked straight down the center aisle past Monica, who looked like she was about to pass out, and stopped at the bench, opened a leather folder, and read, "Winslow, his federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy against rights, wire fraud, money laundering, all the little secrets he thought were buried in sealed files and off-the-books meetings." When they pulled him off that bench and spun him around to cuff him, his black robe looked less like authority and more like a Halloween costume. And yeah, watching the man who had called me trash under his breath now stare at the floor in cuffs that hit something deep in me. Taking down Winslow would have been enough for a lot of people, but we already knew he was not the top of the food chain. He was just one piece on a bigger board, and it did not take long for the next name to surface: Senator Harold Kane. After a few days without her blazer and heels, sitting in a gray jumpsuit in a concrete interview room, Monica told us about Capital Strategies, the consulting firm that billed 10 grand a month to half the judges and DAs in the state, money that bought promotions, protection, and a quiet expectation that they would keep the private prisons full. And at the top of that web sat Kane, the man voters saw on TV talking about safe streets. She told us he kept a ledger, a black book he jokingly called the Bible, where he wrote down every payment, every favor, every judge he owned, and that he kept it in a safe in his home office, never let it leave the house. That is how I ended up in a tux a week later, walking into his mansion under a different name, shaking hands with donors who thought I was Marcus Stone, a venture capital guy looking to invest in corrections infrastructure, while a tactical team sat a few hundred yards away, listening to every word. I found Kane in his ballroom working the crowd, big smile, bigger ego, and I did what I always do. I went straight for that ego, told him his last speech on privatization was impressive, but small, dropped the fake firm name we had built a reputation for, and watched him decide I was worth his time. He led me into his wood-paneled study, poured expensive whiskey, started talking about partnership and opportunity, threw around words like efficiency and flexibility, while we both pretended we were not talking about cages and quotas. And when he finally paused long enough for me to answer, I said, "I am not here for handshakes. Senator, I do not move money without collateral. I want to see the ledger the Bible Monica told us about." His smile disappeared like somebody flipped a switch. He hit a button under his desk. The door behind me clicked locked, and he told me very calmly that he knew exactly who I was, that his friends in law enforcement had called him, that I was not leaving that room the way I came in. Two big guys with guns stepped out of a hidden door like they had practiced this scene, and Kane gave me the speech powerful men love to give about wolves and sheep, and who really runs the system, about judges and sheriffs who answer to him, not the law, about how if I disappeared tonight it would just be one less problem on his radar. I let him talk long enough to confirm everything I needed to hear. Then I said ray lights and the whole house dropped into darkness. Our techs had already killed his backup, so there was no gentle flicker, just black. Then two flashbangs bounced across the floor. The room exploded in white light and noise, and in that dazed half-second I went over the desk, grabbed his wrist before he could reach the drawer, twisted until I felt something pop, and dragged him to the painting on the wall that hid the safe. Pain is a very honest language. He punched the code in with his good hand. The safe swung open, and there it was, the black book full of names, dates, dollar amounts, the real Bible he had been preaching from for 30 years. By the time his private security hit the doorway with rifles raised, ropes were already dropping on the balcony, and hostage rescue team operators in black were coming through the window, laser dots floating over suits and polished shoes, calm voices telling everybody just how bad an idea it would be to pull a trigger. I stood there with Kane zip-tied at my feet and his ledger tucked against my chest, and told those contractors the truth. If they opened fire, they would be shooting at federal agents, while every bit of leverage their boss ever had sat in my hands, and there was no paycheck big enough to make that worth it. After a long beat, their leader lowered his rifle and said, "Not my war," and that was that. They called the fallout operation Broken Scales because once that book came out, it was obvious the justice system in our state had not been balanced in a long time. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, even the governor's staff, all on the take, all treating years of somebody else's life like numbers in a ledger. And for months, you could not turn on a TV without seeing another person in a suit doing a perp walk. 6 months after the day Winslow tried to bury me, I sat in the back row of that same Briarwood courtroom and watched Judge Lila Moreno, a woman Kane had blocked for promotion for years because she would not play along, sentence both of them. Kane got life without parole in federal custody. Winslow got 30 years in a facility he used to brag about filling, and when he realized exactly where he was going and started begging not to be sent there because they know me in that place. The room went quiet. Then the families in the gallery started to clap, not polite, not cruel, just this heavy sound of people finally breathing again. Outside on the steps, Ethan found me leaning against a government SUV, tie loose body, carrying that kind of tired that does not go away with one good night's sleep, and he told me he was running for district attorney. Now said people stopped him in grocery stores to thank him for actually standing up in a courtroom that had been crooked for years. Then he looked at me and said, "So are you done? Can you finally go home?" I told him the ledger had more names, more towns, more judges and wardens and politicians who thought nobody was watching, that the Bureau was putting together a task force to go after them, and they wanted me to help lead it, mostly because I knew what it felt like to sit at that defense table in cuffs and still look a crooked judge in the eye and smile. He shook his head and said quietly, You know you are not a nobody to the people you pulled out of those cells, right? And that stuck with me on the ride out of town because for most of my career, my whole job has been to be nobody. The quiet guy in the back, the man in the jumpsuit. Everybody underestimates. And the ugly truth is, that is exactly why the trap works. So let me throw it to you now. If you were sitting on that jury watching a judge and a cop and a prosecutor stack the deck against somebody who looks like me, would you feel that twist in your gut that says something is off? And would you trust it enough to say anything? Or would you tell yourself they must know better and go along with the story? You know what I mean. And in your world, your town, your job, your family, where have you seen power dressed up as keeping order while it quietly crushes the same kind of people over and over again? Where have you seen someone get written off as nobody and then turn out to be the only one willing to push back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you think what happened to Winslow and Kane was real justice or just the first crack in a broken system. Share your own stories if you have ever been underestimated and then proved somebody wrong. I read as many as I can, and if this story hit something in you, hit like, subscribe, send it to a friend who needs to hear that sometimes the person everybody counts out is exactly the person who changes everything.